Hello, everybody. I'm Sandra Lupian, Director of MassTimber at MSU at Michigan State University, and welcome to this special recording coming out of the Michigan MassTimber Community of Practice. The Michigan MassTimber Community of Practice is a quarterly virtual convening of people who are active in the MassTimber community in Michigan. It's kind of like a technical assistant slash office hours slash webinar combination of activities to really support people's mass timber efforts, whether those are on the manufacturing side, whether you're designing or building a building, you're working in workforce development. This is a community where people come together to support each other and provide information. The Michigan Mass Timber Community of Practice is co-hosted by MassTimber at MSU, WoodWorks, and the American Wood Council, and supported with funding through a grant from the U.S. Forest Service Wood Innovation Program. And here's more information about that. If you're watching this recording and you're interested in participating in the Michigan Mass Timber Community of Practice, you can scan the QR code. It will take you to a form that you fill out to express your interest, and that will eventually get you an invitation to join the Michigan Mass Timber Community of Practice, which again happens quarterly. So this recording today is happening because we hosted a Michigan Mass Timber Community of Practice meeting in June of 2024. And the presenters at that meeting, Michaela Harms and Annavitte Rand, whose pictures are here and who you're about to hear from, gave such incredible and valuable presentations on how to specify regional wood for your mass timber projects right now, that we wanted to make sure that those presentations and insights were available to a broader audience. So we are spending some time recording the presentations for you so that you can enjoy those insights. So if you're listening to this, that's what's about to happen. And I am really pleased to be able to bring this content to you so that you can benefit from these insights when you're planning your mass timber projects. So without further ado from me, I will cede the floor to Annavitte Rand, project engineer with Thornton Tomasetti, who's going to kick off this duo of presentations.
Hi, everyone. My name is Annavitte Rand. I am a project engineer at Thornton Tomasetti, based out of our Portland, Maine office, and I am excited to join you all today and share the Jessup Memorial Library project that we collaborated with Sterling on, and share some of our lessons learned, successes, things that we're excited to do differently in the future, and this whole project as a whole, as well as some of the things that we are learning as we continue our work in designing with mass timber in our office. So we do quite a bit of structural design with mass timber in our office. And a quick little background on Thornton Tomasetti. So I'm based in Portland, Maine, here in the Northeast, but we have offices all over the US and actually all over the world. But a lot of our mass timber expertise has kind of started to be centralized around the Northeast and Midwest offices. So between Chicago and Portland, including Milwaukee and Toronto, and some of our staff in that region as well. So yeah, we're really excited to be able to share some of what we've learned through this project and other projects. And please reach out after this presentation if you would like to chat more. My contact is at the end. All right, so today I'm going to share the Jessup Memorial Library project, and this is the project that is actually being built right now. The structure's been done for some time now, and they're working on the interior fit out. This is a mass timber addition to an existing masonry library that is up in Bar Harbor, Maine. And so it's up in our neck of the woods here in New England. We worked with Simon's Architects, who's a local architect here in Portland, Maine, on this project. And the program of this building is that it is a 3-story expansion of this current library that is right downtown in Bar Harbor. So the main structure, I'm going to give kind of a structural overview and then work into the architectural programming and then get into some of the lessons learned on the mass timber. So our main structure for this 3-story addition is a Douglas fir glue lam post and beam type system that is supporting hemlock cross-laminated timber panels that were supplied by Sterling. And we also have several hemlock CLT panels as a vertical shear wall, also acting as part of the main structural system here. So how did we land on mass timber for this building? From the beginning of the project, the owner was really excited about using mass timber in this building. They're like, wood is a really big product coming out of Maine. It's part of our history here. How can we incorporate this into this addition? They actually, with the help of the design team, applied for a USDA Wood Innovation Grant to use Maine-grown hemlock, ship it to a facility that could process it into CLT, and then bring it back to the site. And so it's a really neat story that has, this building, when you look inside and see all of this exposed wood, you're actually looking at hemlock that was grown and processed in Maine, and then processed by Sterling out in the Midwest into these panels and then shipped back to our site. So it's a really neat story. And it was really helpful that we actually received this grant for this whole process to offset some of the costs of that structural system. We actually had an original design for the building using an alternative CLT and glulam source from Europe that we've used on other projects here in Maine and had some success with it. But I think what's really special about this project, and I think is a great model for other designers, is really being able to use that local wood and making that feasible for a project in kind of a small area of the country. It's not like we're in, a really big urban center and have all these resources at our hands. So anyhow, that is the main structure. Here is a general floor plan. And so you can see it's kind of a unique shape, and with that came quite a few interesting design constraints to work with. So in the right part of the screen, in the kind of upper right, is the existing masonry library kind of in gray shading. And then in the darker lines, you'll see the programming of the new library edition. And so it's kind of a unique shape, but actually steps in, which you'll see in the next slide, as you go up floors. And so not all of the bearing systems or our shear walls or partition walls are necessarily lining up and stacking as we go down the building. So it's definitely presented some challenges architecturally and structurally, but we're pretty excited with how the outcome is, and I'll show some photos of the actual building in a bit here. So to go into some of those project constraints, one of the biggest constraints for us is that we're trying to meet the existing floor-to-floor elevations of this masonry building, and those were pretty tight. And so we were trying to work with the span of the hemlock panel that we were going to use, a really tricky grid layout that architecturally was really favorable, and still meeting these tight floor-to-floor heights. And so this meant needing to keep our structural beams as shallow as possible to get the minimum head heights that we needed. It also meant optimizing the span of our CLT between beams, and therefore that beam layout to work with as efficiently as possible with that hemlock CLT panel. So we ended up with a system that has more frequent beams of smaller size, supporting a 3-ply, which is about 4 inches thick, 3 laminations CLT panel. So it's definitely it's a unique system. I think we'll get into some lessons learned at the end and what we have seen over the course of our designing quite a few mass timber buildings in our office is what we see as most efficient. I think this system, we were able to make it work here, but it took quite a bit of kind of creative out of the box thinking and collaboration between all the design disciplines. Continuing with those tricky project constraints, here's a layout of that grid system that was the most architecturally favorable. So we have an 11-foot grid, which is pretty tight, and I think was helpful for getting more frequent structural members in, so we could shallow up those members, because fewer or more tightly spaced members means each one takes a little bit less load, means it can be a little bit smaller in size. But yeah, getting all of this to work with the programming and working with the existing building was for sure a challenge. But what was great is that we knew from earlier in the design process that we were going to be using Sterling CLT products. And so we got from them the design criteria for that particular hemlock panel that they had tested and gotten a PRG 320 certification for. So we were able to look at exact design values and capacities of that panel and design for them, as opposed to what sometimes happens in other projects where you kind of take a guess at what panel you might get and maybe lowball it and then end up with a product that actually has a lot more capacity that you're not using. So I think this was a great example of an ideal flow of the project, in that we knew we were going to supply wood from Sterling. We had design values from them. We actually even had how long they typically fabricate panels too. And so we took all of that information and were able to really optimize the CLT panel layout to have as little waste as possible, and to really span that panel as far as it could go, to make it, the most efficient structure possible. We worked, so Sterling makes the CLT, and they are a great company to work with, because even though they aren't fabricating glulam, they are able to bring on a glulam supplier and process all of the shop drawings for your project in-house, so that we, as the structural engineer and the rest of the design team, are really only interfacing with one mass timber supplier, which in this case was Sterling. So Sterling partnered with QB Glulam, and they supplied that Douglas fir glulam product, and they processed all of the shop drawings. So we were able to review that as just one kind of package altogether, as opposed to two separate things. So really helpful part in the process to streamline the shop drawing review and construction. I wanted to share a couple of details that we came up with that I think are unique to this project, in that one of the things that we learned with Sterling is that part of their business model is making a CLT product that is using off-the-shelf timbers. And so these panels are a little bit shorter than what some other manufacturers make. Okay, so one of the benefits of a tighter grid system is that it's more feasible to use off-the-shelf products, because the loads on each of your members is a little bit smaller. So with using a Sterling CLT product, designers will see that their panels are fabricated a little bit shorter than some other suppliers, because they're using off-the-shelf 2x framing lengths to make their products. And so instead of using a balloon frame system for our CLT shear walls, we were actually using what we call a platform frame system. So all of our wall framing that was made out of CLT was spanning just floor to floor. So we have a wall panel installed, the floor comes and sits on top of that, and then the next floor panel comes up on top of that. Or sorry, the next wall panel is stacked on top of that. And so one of the benefits here is that you are actually kind of breaking up the structure into more components, and that allows for you to use proprietary connections a little bit more easily, as it can work with the loads that you have. And so we took advantage of that and used as many proprietary products as we could. And we supplied a lot of those through Simpson. So we're using some light gauge straps for our hold downs from CLT wall to wall. We use some proprietary shear transfer angles from the CLT wall to the CLT floor. So I think that was one of the advantages of this system that we came up with. That was kind of a byproduct of using Sterling as a supplier for this project, is we were able to use all of these off-the-shelf products, as opposed to a custom bent plate or a really custom heavy steel hanger for something that's a little bit bigger and more robust. So now I'm going to share a few construction photos, now that we got through kind of the general overview of this building. And we'll start with early in construction. So here was a site visit photo I took. I think it was probably in the fall, when they had finished the foundation and they were just starting with the mass timber erection. So they started with the CLT shaft first. So these are wall panels that are going to enclose an elevator shaft. They're also double acting as shear walls and as part of the main lateral system of our building. And so as those shaft walls were going up, you can see here's some of those straps, those light gauge Simpson straps that I just showed on a detail a few slides ago. And you can kind of see that sandwich type construction where a CLT wall ends, the floor comes down on top of that, and then the next wall is erected on top of that floor. So that's that sandwich platform type construction. And you can also see some of the proprietary proprietary straps that we were using for what we call a spline connection. So in the floor and roof system, you're going to have CLT panels that butt each other as you place, one panel next to the next. And we used a light gauge Simpson strap here for that panel to panel connection. One of the few custom products that we actually designed on the project were what you see in the upper right corner, which is a steel hold down for this CLT shear wall. And so this was a custom designed hold down, and it's kind of like a steel saddle that hugs the bottom of that panel and has anchor rods that are embedded into the foundation. But other than that, most products were proprietary. Here's the level 1 Douglas fir glulam framing going up. So you can really see the greens of that beautiful Douglas fir wood. I think it was a really nice combination with the hemlock appearance with the CLT. As we start to get more levels of framing going up, you can really see how everything is coming together here. And I wanted to zoom in on both these photos. You can see a little slot at the bottom of the beam, and what that is a slot where a proprietary beam hanger has been installed, recessed into the face of the glulam beam, and then the other kind of component of that hanger is on the face of the CLT panel. And so using these proprietary items made it for a pretty quick install, and we were psyched that we were able to make use of those on this project. A few more construction photos. It's a beautiful site, so it's definitely it was a very good day in the office to be able to go up there and walk around and check things out. And then here we are as the cold form exterior walls are starting to go up. So these were not load bearing. These are all just exterior walls. We did take advantage of this skin by using these as strapped cold form shear walls in some locations. So our lateral system is a combination of the CLT shear wall and the strap cold form shear wall around the perimeter. But all load bearing elements within the structure are mass timber. And then a few more photos from the inside as we're starting to be enclosed. So it's pretty fun that this project is really finishing up construction here. I don't know exact start or opening date, but they're definitely wrapping up the interior fit out sometime this summer and fall. So after sharing that, I wanted to summarize with what are some of the best practices for designing with mass timber that we see having done a few of these projects in our office. So I think the first and biggest one is early commitment to a mass timber supplier if possible, and just to a mass timber structure. I think where we see mass timber be really expensive, less feasible for a project is when a project starts out in design as steel or some other type of structural system, and maybe in the DD phase, or I don't know, later in the design, the owner comes back or the architect comes back and says, actually, we really want to try to use mass timber, and you're trying to fit this system to what you've already designed. So that's a really hard way to do it. If you can start with mass timber at the beginning of your design and even select a supplier, that is what we see as the best way to go about this. The reason for selecting a supplier is that every supplier out there has a little bit different product based on where they're located geographically, which dictates what kind of wood they use in their products, and just what type of layups they create. So some offer a stronger panel, some offer a whole breadth of panels, some only offer one type of product. And so knowing what you're going to get on your product for your structural product is really helpful in then being able to design with that type of grade or strength in mind. If you can't commit to a supplier early, think about what your options might be. So maybe based on where your project is located geographically, you could come up with a list of like, okay, who are the suppliers that are in my region or nearby, or maybe that have been used on some projects nearby, and look at those material design values and try to design your structure as efficiently as you can, kind of thinking of that broader strength range. So definitely have at least in the back of your mind who might be someone that could supply the mass timber on your project. The third thing here is laying out a structural grid that works well with the products that are available. So again, if you know your supplier, that's the best option. If you don't, try to find some medium that kind of could fit a multitude of suppliers out there. This CLT panel strength depends on the type of wood you use and the number of orientations, or the number and the orientations of your laminations. So work with the CLT panel that you might get first to optimize that span of CLT, and then put your structural grid at that span that is most efficient. That's what we found to be one of the best practices here. So one of the other things that we've found to be super efficient is when you can really make your structural grid as fitting to the mass timber strengths as possible. So if you are, instead of working with maybe a typical 20 by 20 grid on your building, or a 30 by 30, trying to work with what is most efficient for that product, and instead of fitting the mass timber to a grid that might be more typical or preferred architecturally. The fourth thing here is working with your supplier to optimize the benefits of the prefabrication. And so what do I mean by prefabrication? All of your mass timber products are, when they are being fabricated in the shop, you have the opportunity to make certain cuts in the panel in that shop. And I think we really recommend taking advantage of that as much as possible. So if you have a bunch of holes that need to go in your CLT floor panels for MEP penetration, or let's say you have certain proprietary hangers that you want to use for beam to beam or beam to column connections, and those require maybe recessing that hanger into the face of the beam, make those cuts in the shop if you can, because it really streamlines the time on site for erecting these mass timber components. And then the fifth thing here is really setting some good expectations with your builder. One of the big lessons learned that we've found over the course of these projects is that the mass timber structures, because of this kind of prefabricated nature of them coming out of the fabrication shop, are really cut to such a tight precision that it really relies on the foundation being that level of precise in order for all of the timber elements to then be erected to that level of precision. And so making some early kind of expectations with the builder known of keeping your tolerances within the foundation, as tight as possible, and really paying a little bit extra attention to that is a really good plus. I think the other thing with timber is that because it's wood, I think a lot of builders have this kind of assumption that, oh, I can just drill through it if I need a hole. I can, maybe reset some screws wherever I need to, just because it's not like steel where you're not out there just drilling through steel all the time. And so that isn't always possible, because something, if you can't just go drill a hole through your beam. So I think setting that expectation with your builder of what type of field penetrations are allowed is really helpful. So that's all I have on sharing our mass timber experience in the Jessup Memorial Library project. And so here's my contact info. Please feel free to reach out, and would love to engage more with your community. So I think now we're going to hear from Michaela Harms from Sterling about more of Sterling's expertise.
We certainly are. Annavitte, thank you so much for sharing the experiences in the Jessup Library. Really insightful presentation, and we appreciate hearing it. And indeed, Michaela, if you can pull up your slides, and we're ready for you to get started with your presentation about how to specify for regional wood.
All right. Well, hello, I'm Michaela Harms. I'm the Vice President of Mass Timber for Sterling. We are primarily a CLT manufacturer, but turnkey, hybrid and mass timber building products provider and design support. And great to move from Annavitte's experience and that incredible project with Jessup Memorial Library to how we can replicate that approach to using regional mass timber in Michigan. I'm actually located in Wisconsin, and then our main facility is just south of Chicago. So we're right in the region, and really looking to support regional forestry across the country. But we'll keep this one very focused on how to support Michigan's regional supply chain today, and also kind of the greater Great Lakes region. Ooh, there we go. So I'd love to start with this image because it's one project that really, beyond our work with Annavitte and Simon's Architects at Jessup Memorial Library, this is a project that was for Britton Lumber in New Hampshire. And it's so cool to see this beautiful forested background, this is a sawmill edition where they're expanding their kiln area, and they use spruce pine fir south locally sourced CLT panels for the addition on this building. So again, that connection between the forest that's surrounding this building made its way right into the building that then processes that material. And so really that's what this whole conversation is about, which is supporting those regional forest supply chains with and the woodland economies that support them. And we want to see this replicable across the entire country. And we've seen a lot of growth of this interest and even examples in Michigan. So nice to start there. And as far as that kind of regionalized approach, it's good to know where your forests are located. So here's a map of the US with our forested areas. Obviously, in the bottom, you can see one of the largest fiber baskets and our main species, which is southern pine. So vernacular to that region and those different pines that grow in the south. Based on Annavitte's project, you see in the Northeast, very heavily wooded. Spruce pine fir south is actually spruce pine fir from the US, so south of the Canadian border. So very prominent in that region with lots of mill support, as well as in our upper Midwest region. There are other species, of course, that we know that make up our really biodiverse forests all along this eastern area of the country. And then as you move out west, we're talking Doug fir, and spruce pine fir from Canada, and even spruce pine fir south in the different regions out west. So good to know what our forest breakdown is and where that supply really comes from so that we're really connecting that supply chain together. Sandra and Jake Chittister are leading a really great effort for Great Lakes MassTimber Collaborative. So talking about the Great Lakes region as a whole and how we can build into MassTimber supply chains within that region. So it's really important as you look for Michigan-based and Great Lakes-based projects to know what manufacturers are already in your region. So we are so lucky in this region to have already 5 MassTimber manufacturers. So Timber Technologies, Rigid Ply, Bell Structural, and Unilam are all glulam manufacturers. We do partner with each one of these, as Annavitte pointed out, that we also supply glulam through these partners and others. And then Sterling, based there in just south of Chicago. That's one of our 2 facilities. Our other one is in Texas, but as far as the Great Lakes region, that's the local CLT supply based around there. So now zooming into Michigan, as we think about that forest supply and then translating to the supply chain of forest products. So obviously Michigan's economy has a great support for different forest products and wood products manufacturing. There's a wide variety, as you can see here from this map, all of the different facilities that exist. So now as we move towards MassTimber, we start to narrow down to sawmills. This map currently, as I have it displayed, is both hardwood and softwood sawmills. So we know that there are applications for hardwood MassTimber, but it's not the immediate do it right now. There's work to be done on bond line testing that MSU and Michigan Tech are all focused on and really helping to expand the opportunities for that product. But right now, if we're talking about specifying timber today, boom, we zoom in a little bit further. Here's our softwood mills in Michigan. So when we think about regional supply chain, here's your 2-day accessible regional supply chain. The beginning, at least, I think of the forest really at the beginning, but the beginning of your processed material that would move into a MassTimber product. Okay, so I'm going to refer back to memorizing these dots quite a few times. There won't be a test, but it's good to really ground ourselves in what's available. And so if we're looking at expanding opportunities for Michigan mass timber and Great Lakes regional mass timber today, there really are some steps to success. And I like moving from Annavitte's case study into how that lays out in each of these, because I think through her experience, you've already kind of been familiarized with what each of these could entail in an actual project environment. So we'll zoom out a little bit to what it means for Michigan mass timber projects. As far as where I always like to start and why I ground ourselves in maps is we really like to build off what exists, right? So build off the manufacturers you have in your region and build off of the forest supply you have in your region. So in Michigan, there's great access to spruce pine fir south and eastern hemlock. And this is similar, again, like we talked about in the New England region. So when we start with these, then you go, okay, this is what's available. Here are all the lumber, are all of the trees that make up those species. So I know Eastern hemlock, the way that it's certified is actually Eastern hemlock tamarack. So we are certified to use both of those materials. And then for spruce pine fir south, at least under NELMA, so that's New England Lumber Manufacturers Association, that would be your grade stamp for lumber coming out of Michigan. There is also Western Wood Products Association, spruce pine fir south, that is for the western region of the country, and that includes a couple of different species as well. But for this conversation, we're looking at Michigan. And so when we talk about that kind of accessibility to your existing forest supply chain, our approach, as Annavitte mentioned, is using what already exists from our sawmills. So we really take that approach of what the sawmill makes. And so we use all number 2 lumber. And the reason for that, it's super available. It's, you can get it off the shelf, you can get it in very specific lengths, and you can get it consistently. And so graded number 2 visual lumber is what we use to build out our kind of more standardized approaches to mass timber panels or CLT panels. That is not the only approach by any means. There's always opportunities for E grades, and there's always opportunities for, finger joining and longer lengths. But as far as what's available today and what's really readily available, it's important to work with what's available in Michigan. And I believe, I'm not 100% sure of this, but currently I'm not sure there are very many MSR facilities at the sawmills in Michigan. So visual grade is going to be what's most readily available. And then, so we started with those species groups. Spruce pine fir south is by far going to be the most readily available mass timber product or lamination product coming out of Michigan, as we remember in that map. And then layups for your panels, like there's infinite amounts of layups that you can specify as a designer, as an architect, as an engineer. But really knowing what's available, it goes back to working with the manufacturer early, working with them to know, hey, does this have a longer lead time? Does this have a higher price point? Understanding what's kind of standard within their own manufacturing capabilities, and then what might be custom and could add to time, money, all of that type of thing. And then a really important piece, of course, is what's actually certified. So to be put into a mass timber product, or for a mass timber product to be put into a construction project, you have to have a code report, right? Either through APA, ICCES, and a couple of other certification agencies that are out there. And that just shows that we're following rigorous quality control standards, using the right products, making sure our adhesives have the proper fire retardants in it, so that building code officials and engineers can be confident in the design values and the performance of those products. And so for cross-laminated timber, which I'm going to focus on for the majority of the beginning of this presentation, because it's what currently is so readily available for Michigan wood, and we'll talk a little bit more about other products at the end. So at the top, in the middle here, the first chart is a V4 panel, and we call it V4 plus because we use number 2 in both directions as opposed to trying to use number 3 in the minor axis. And so having these design values for V4 plus, which is spruce pine fir south, and then EHT, so eastern hemlock tamarack, these are directly calculated out of the requirements for the PRG 320 standard. And then they're printed in our evaluation report, which ours is with ICC. A lot of other manufacturers work with APA, and those are recognizable reports that engineers and code report officials building code officials have confidence in and know that you can use today. And so it really does come down to your design on keeping Michigan wood in your product or putting Michigan wood into your product. So when you start, if that's truly the priority, which we'd love to see more of this regional approach to mass timber products, you have to start with Michigan wood in mind. And so here's one of the really beautiful examples out of Michigan. This was Vaughan Timbers. They used red pine from Michigan. This is at the Newberry DNR facility, and it's absolutely gorgeous, right? And so that's what they did, though, right? The team thought about it from the beginning. They incorporated it from the beginning, and they designed for it from the beginning. And so if you want to ensure that your design can accommodate your local species, make sure that that's your baseline of what you're designing for. So from the structural perspective, spruce pine fir south and eastern hemlock panels are going to have a lower design value because those species tend to have a lower design values as a whole. Lower design value does not mean it's a bad product. It doesn't mean it's a weak product. It just means your structural engineer is going to design differently with it. So you can absolutely design to accommodate it. And if you're asking your structural engineer to make sure it's an option, you have to make sure that's a baseline. Because if they design with southern pine or Doug fir, you can't go down. You can only kind of go up, right? So making sure you start there. And then, I think you guys all hear us say this over and over, but really trying to coordinate with a manufacturer early on what's even possible, right? So this was a great example of coordinating with Vaughan Timbers early, saying we want to use Michigan red pine. And that would never happen if that conversation hadn't happened so early, right? That's not something you can kind of do as an afterthought. So the lovely thing about the mass timber industry is we are so collaborative and we're so ready to help you. Every manufacturer in the country is happy to support your project and help make sure that your priorities are come to life, right? So even if you coordinate with a few manufacturers early, you're not going to hurt our feelings. See what's possible and see what aligns with your intent from the beginning. And then I'll mention it again here. Of course, there are infinite layups, but really understand what's available and market ready, because if you want to do it today, use what's available. You can always push your manufacturer, push teams. Hey, if you could just do this, this would really help in these types of projects. We're pretty open to adjusting for what the market needs. But starting out with what's market ready today will get you to that stage. And then always making sure your project priorities, whether that's local species, whether that's sustainability, or making sure you have as much mass timber in the project as possible, or maybe your priority is going hybrid. Just making sure that you understand those early and align them with your team so you have a really good outcome. So one thing we talk a lot about, especially as we get into these more regional species, is your flexibility on your grid. So if you kind of start with a grid that's not very well optimized for the product you're going for, it could be hard to kind of fit the mold into what you need to do there. Or you might be paying a lot more for your material because it's not optimally laid out or efficiently laid out. So you want to use those structural capacities, really well. I think Annavitte also mentioned that in her thing. Like, we know what we were using in the beginning so that we could design for what was there and design for it efficiently. Whereas if you kind of design for multiple different species who have very different design values, you might be overextending one or underextending another. So you don't always know that right away, of course, but being open and flexible to being as efficient as possible is what is going to get your project build and help value engineer your project. I always like to throw in kind of DFMA principles as well. So it is important, as I say, importance of the connection to the supply chain, also connecting to the manufacturing and fabrication capabilities and efficiencies of manufacturing. So starting to understand some more DFMA principles will again make sure that your project is fabrication ready, it's value engineered, and you want to reduce time, cost, risk, of course, and keep the quality very high, while also keeping your waste low and your efficiency, very, very tight. So I highly recommend, I gave you that map of all the mass timber manufacturers in the Great Lakes region. Definitely set up tours. Getting into someone's facility, seeing it. We're all, especially in the design community, very visual, very hands-on people. And so it's really helpful to get in there and understand, ask questions. A lot of us have very open doors, and we just want to work with you and help you understand how these materials go together so we can work together to design really incredible buildings. So additionally, we want to design for as much efficiency as possible. We take an approach, because we come from the industrial matting business originally, of trying to get to a lot of repeatable spans and repeatable pieces, because then it's very scalable. We want to get more into the modular design, panelized design, more of a kit of parts, if you will, because with that scale and kind of volume, we're able to do a lot more, put these things up faster. Now, when you're sequencing them for construction, pieces can be moved into different directions as opposed to every single piece being a bespoke piece. So it's not only for, efficiency of fabrication, but it's also for efficiency of install and constructability. And then obviously, one of the things we also tell people is, of course, you want your architect and engineer involved early. When a manufacturer gets involved, like us or any of the other ones out there, a lot of us will also tell you, hey, do you have an installer yet? We should start talking to your install team and make sure they're at the table early and having this conversation, because they bring so much value to understanding how we can be efficient, get these things up fast, and really get all of the benefits of mass timber. And then a lot of people really hate to hear this, but we can do customization all day long. And I think historically, the mass timber industry has been very open, given a full platter of every single thing that's possible. And that's great for, these very high-end cover of architect magazine type buildings. But if we're being honest, 90% of buildings aren't those buildings. And we really are trying to get it as cost efficient as possible, so that we can, expand affordable housing, expand things like that. And so when you think about it, the more repeatable, the more scalable, less customization allows for higher quality because of the repeatability and reduces your time and cost. And so as far as appearance classifications, this is a big piece that can pull these local species out of your projects quite quickly. And so one of the examples, that beautiful Newberry building. So on the top left, bottom left, and bottom right, those are spruce pine fir south projects. For each one of those projects, we actually specifically, because of some aesthetic requirements, had to ask the mills, hey, can you actually sort out all the red pine? So understandable if you have a color palette already in mind, or an aesthetic that needs to be achieved, we can do it. It's just understanding that now that support of your red pine utilization in Michigan goes away with that type of request. So there's some alternative pathways that we'll talk about briefly, but as well as not only kind of the color that you might see in red pine or some additional species, it's also considering your knot sizes. I've seen some specifications that start talking about not just holes, right, which we always kind of fill in holes, but knot sizes. Trees have branches. I always like to say that, so that when we start asking for really clear wood or asking for really small knots, we're just asking trees not to be trees. So I think we all need to open up our minds to the beauty of wood, and be open to some of the character that comes with, especially our northern and upper Midwest species. So just remember that when you put those types of things in specifications, it could definitely detract from your overall priorities and goals. But there's also other paths you can consider. So this is not a spruce pine for South project. This is a southern pine project. And a lot of times what we hear for southern pine is maybe that amber tone that comes with some of the species that are in the southern pine classification might not quite fit the aesthetic of the project. So this is a project from SmartLam where you can see the glue lamb is southern pine and the panels are also southern pine. But the glue lamb has already, before they're putting the panels in, been whitened up with a wash. So that is one really good opportunity. If the aesthetics are like really what's important to you, but you still have that priority of using Michigan wood, and whatever direction you want to go, darker, lighter, whatever that may be, talk to your installers, because on site you can do some really beautiful things with washes to achieve those aesthetic looks, but still honor your local species. This topic is always one that can really evoke a lot of emotion in people. But the fiber certifications and sourcing. So we all know about FSC, SFI, American Tree Farm. There's a lot of different certifications out there. And sometimes when you spec those certifications, you're now getting rid of, a big, huge part of your supply chain that might be available to you because either they can't afford the certification, it's not, readily available in their region, things like that. One thing we know about US forestry is thanks to best management practices, thanks to the Clean Air and Water Act, and the amazing foresters in this company, or in this country, we have really good sustainable regenerative forestry in the United States. I really urge you to find your local foresters, talk to them, learn a little bit more about their management plans. And even maybe your local sawmill, some of them have their own foresters who are willing to talk to you and say, hey, yeah, we source from 100 miles around our plant. Here's some of the things we know. Some of it's public, some of it's private. Here are the best management practices we follow. And that might be achieving all of the things you could achieve with a certification without maybe the extra money required for a certification, or, the limitation of the supply chain. So just keep those things in mind. And then one of the best things about regional is now you can really consider that transportation. Your wood isn't moving so far. One of the things we do when we work with Southern Pine is most of that material comes on rail, which is a really low carbon transport method. So just working with the team and the manufacturer, kind of understand all of those things. So now I'll zoom back out to MassTimber as a whole conversation. So glulam in this country is typically Doug fir or Southern pine. And those are the reigning species within AITC standard or ANSI 119. And just kind of what's readily available on the market. So you saw all those glulam manufacturers that are in our regions. They're likely all working in Doug fir, mostly Southern pine, just because of their location within the country, because most of the Doug fir comes from the Pacific Northwest. Ricky McLean and Andrew Fast from University of New Hampshire Extension have put out a design guidebook for spruce pine for South glulam. So there is work, there is an openness to expanding what's available, expanding production capabilities for regional wood and glulam, but it's not as market ready as we talked about as others. So I would say that, if you don't have the design guidebook, reach out to Ricky McLean, reach out to University of New Hampshire Extension, reach out to me. You can start to see what the design requirements are for SPF South. It's very different than Southern pine and Doug fir, which are very similar. So you're really going to have to work with your engineer early and also try to find some suppliers who are ready to do that. So that's a little bit like slightly in the future, but it's nice to know people are working on it, right? And then if local wood doesn't meet the priority of your project overall for glulam, just because of that market readiness piece or cost or whatever that may be, at least consider a regional manufacturer. So you're supporting the forest products economy of your region. And then the bottom left there, which I know there's been a ton of work, one with the DNR project that we showed, but also just in general in Michigan, is nail laminated timber. This is a really easy entry product for using regional wood. And I know that people are working on scaling this product more, so that's another thing that you can consider in your projects. So to round all of that out, it's a lot to think about, of course, but I'm glad, Sandra puts these things together to get the information out there and get people thinking about it. And so if you want Michigan wood in your projects and taking action now, start with the specification, specify it, say you want it, right? Work with your manufacturer. And then we really need examples. So I think a lot of people ask manufacturers, hey, can you guys push this? Can you push that? We don't push much. We just kind of meet what the market asks for. Maybe I'm a little pushy sometimes, but that's probably, I live in the upper Midwest and I want to see more use of these supply chains. My early career was breaking red pine logs to show design values of that species at Forest Products Lab. So it's really near and dear to my heart. But I'm also not going to drive the market, right? So we need examples from developers, owners, architects, engineers to really push the market and get this more out there. And then use your resources to make sure it's possible, right? Don't get discouraged because something got off, call Sandra, call Thornton Tomasetti, call Sterling, call Bell Structural, all these different people, and ask them what's possible. We're here to work with you and collaborate. And then, of course, the building for innovation never stops. So yes, we want to drive action now, but we also want to drive innovation for the future. So amazing work coming out of MSU and Michigan Tech on hardwoods. I'd be happy to talk to anybody about what we've done for ourselves on the industrial side for hardwood CLT and our support there. Also, lignin-based adhesives. I, as a manufacturer, am really excited about this. There's a lot of work to be done. MSU is really leading the way here. And we just got to get it into the structural standard, ANSI 405. And I know that there's a grant enacted right now to keep that moving. And then regional fabrication is another option to benefit from the mass timber industry within your region. So all these things are coming. We all need to keep working together, keep those examples flowing. And this is why we do it, of course, right? So we do it for the longevity and the excitement around our forest products and our forests and to keep them going. The bottom left there is actually my oak savanna just right behind me. So I, as a forest owner, am also, very passionate about how these materials, the utilization of these materials, the continued growth of these materials, provide forests for the future. So we had a nice Q&A in the original one, and I would say that both Annavitte and I and Sandra are very available for anybody to reach out and let us know if you have any questions.
Well, that's absolutely true. Michaela, thank you so much for sharing those wonderful insights. Great presentation. I hope that between your presentation, Michaela, and your presentation, Annavitte, that the question, can I specify regional wood in my mass timber project today, has been answered? And the answer is yes. You have to think about it carefully. You have to work with your manufacturers. Best practice to design to the specifications and capacities and capabilities of the manufacturer that you're going to work with to really optimize the success of doing that. But it is possible today. And I think it's a very exciting moment for development of our mass timber industry for that reason. We can use wood from our regions in projects right here at home. And these presentations provide insights into how to do that. With that, we'll move toward closing out this segment of the Michigan Mass Timber Community of Practice. If you're interested in joining the Michigan Mass Timber Community of Practice, again, that's hosted quarterly, virtually by Mass Timber at MSU, WoodWorks, and the American Wood Council. Here's a QR code you can scan to take you to the information you need to provide to us so we can invite you to participate. Again, our presenters today, Michaela Harms, president of MassTimber at Sterling, Annavitte Rand, project engineer with Thornton Tomasetti. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge and experiences with our folks. And if you want more information about the Michigan MassTimber Community of Practice, how to connect with our presenters, follow up for anything you have to ask about MassTimber in Michigan or beyond, please feel free to contact me here. Thank you so much and look forward to hearing from you about your MassTimber endeavors.